What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have yet another album review for you. This week has actually yielded a lot of killer stuff, and this one heavily requested, and I totally get why, because this is this band's first album in like 16 years. So we're going to go over the latest offering from Sacrifice, Volume 6, because it's their 6th album.
Oh.
I know, another one of those. This comes out on the 21st of February on High Roller Records. This band formed in 1983 in Canada. This, again, is their 6th album. I only recently got into them within the last couple of years with their first 3 albums, but namely it's Forward to Termination and Soldiers of Misfortune that really just clicked with me. We actually saw them at MDF 2024, and what's cool about this comeback is this actually features the same lineup they had back when they released their first album. Now, when this band was described to me years ago, someone pretty much said, oh, you never heard of Sacrifice? They're like the Canadian Slayer. To which I responded, dude, someone said the exact same fucking thing about Razor.
Yeah.
And they were also right. So, I mean, baseline, you could call this band the Canadian Slayer, but this is just, balls to the wall, flat out, just gnarly thrash metal.
Now, normally, I would say things like, this is the first time I've heard this band, but that's not true. The first time I heard this band was at MDF last year, so I've got that going for me for a change, so I'm going to take a moment and pat myself on the back. But no, this is the first time I've heard a Sacrifice record all the way through, so that's where I stand. And, people are pretty correct in calling them Canadian Slayer. Again, the same thing can be said about Razor, but just a riff farm. Balls to the wall, aggressive thrash. Pretty much any way you like it, this is that.
Now, as I said, I only own the first 3 albums, which I think are all really solid. I haven't picked up on the ones that followed that. So I don't know how this one would actually compare to the more recent albums, but baseline, I can tell you this 100% sounds like Sacrifice, and right from the rip. Comatose comes in with a very ominous, dark sort of hum in the background. You get these creepy, clean melodies, and then it just goes full tilt boogie right into just hefty thrash riffs, fast drums, maniacal screams. Vocals on here remind me so much of Destruction and honestly like Morbid Saint. Like it's got that kind of just dry kind of scream. It just sounds mean as shit, and that really works for thrash.
And a little bit of John Tardy theatrics.
Yeah.
They're there.
If you've been listening to Sacrifice for any number of years, especially if you've been listening to the first 3 albums like I only have, there's a lot of familiarity. Like the barn burners on here definitely burn barns. In fact, one of them at least explodes a barn because it's called Explode.
And oddly enough, even though that's a barn burner, that song is also fairly dynamic, I would say. Just has a lot of great transitions. It goes from slower to groovier. There's a bunch of triplet chugging going on. There's a sinister breakdown in there. There's not a lot of breakdowns that this band incorporates, but that's definitely one of those songs. But it's got a bunch of harmonized dive bombs. There's just a bunch going on.
Dude, the guitar work on here, I'll just say it, this is a guitar-driven album.
It is.
It is a riff farm. Every single song in here has flat-out catchy riffs, but there's also a lot of riff variety. Again, if you love barn burners, this is loaded with them. Missile, Your Hunger for War, Incoming Mass Extinction is a short 2-minute kind of punky hardcore banger. A little bit of Wraith and Toxic Holocaust, kind of that vibe there. The closer, We Will Not Survive, is just chock full of hefty kind of low-end tremolos, which those are all over here and kind of gives this album a nice, sinister kind of dark sound, but also flat-out percussive chugging. When this band gets down to chugging, it's nasty. The syncopated gallops and chugs at the end of We Will Not Survive are just flat-out heavier than hell and kind of just drive that song like a fucking, like a machine-like pulse.
Yeah, the triplet chugs in Missile, the triplet chugs in Explode, it just pounds every time. And I won't say this is full of build-ups, but it seems like the only time it really does build up is before they drop a triplet chug. And the guitar tone on here, talking about strong, crunchy guitars, and when the leads come in, they cut through really nicely, and it's got a bottom-heavy chug on it, and I love it. You do get a couple times where the bass comes out to play, and it's a little more present. Songs like Underneath Millennia starts out with a tribal drum groove and an isolated bass section, and even then, the bass isn't really all that loud.
Yeah, it's a warm tone, but I mean, this is a very guitar-dominated album.
The same can be said for Black Hashish, where the bass comes out to play a little bit, but it's not really prominent in the mix. It just kind of sits in the middle. The drums, though, are big and punchy. The drummer reminds me a lot of a less flashy Jason Bittner because of how solid he is. Like, this guy can D-beat gallop his ass off.
But there's also a little bit more in his wheelhouse and in the band's wheelhouse in general, too, because while I kind of expected like a full bore just thrash attack throughout this entire album, which this band is known for, granted, lots of cool riff changes, lots of fun transitions. It's not a one-note thrash listen. There's a lot of elements to their sound overall. This one kind of wandered into like some proggier territory, which I really wasn't expecting. Underneath Millennia, honestly, that song reminds me more of like early Meshuggah, like Contradictions Collapse, and Coroner. Like, honestly, there are parts in that song in particular that sound like they could have been like plucked off of Mental Vortex. It is a more lavish song in terms of like the transitions. Rhythmically, it's a lot different. Like, you get these like big tribal patterns and really cool turnovers on there. Like, he kind of goes from like Jason Bittner to like Gene Hoglan a bit there. And the riff work is a little bit different. Like, you get some like, hefty syncopated chugs, but rhythmically they're a little bit different. Kind of similar to like bands like Anacrusis. And you also get a little bit more in the way of like dissonant melodies, which kind of creates this interesting kind of cold atmosphere.
Another proggy song, which is also instrumental and awesome as fuck, is the song Black Hashish. 6 minutes and 33 seconds, it's a riff farm. You get a lot of dissonant harmonies, it's a lot darker, and this song even creeps into death territory as well.
It does. There are points in that song that reminded me of like Symbolic. There's so many of these like very Chuck-ish harmonies. There's bending, lurching riffs. It does have like a little bit of like a progressive death metal sort of character. I mean, there's still thrashy riffs on there, but for the most part, like just the way the song is built and flows, like you have haunting, ghostly female vocals and clean passages that are kind of like spooky and evocative, and that builds into these just tremendous riffs. Like, holy shit, some of my favorite riffs on the album.
And one after another, too. It's just like every time they hit a transition, it transitions into something more badass than what they had on the riff before it. I thought it was really cool. One of my favorite songs on the record.
And that was something that I really enjoyed about this one. Like, it does kind of exactly what I would want a Sacrifice album to do, again, as far as I've listened. But it also threw in some cool wrinkles, and overall, it does have this like darker, aggressive tone. Again, I like the use of like the low end tremolos. Like, it's not all just like machine gun chugging and such. They mix up the riff work, and the riff work is, very much rooted in thrash. Like, you're not going to hear like, oh my God, this is like the most wild new thing ever. It's thrash. But I needed to do these things for it to be thrash. It's got to have the chugs. It's got to have the aggression. And they do all of it well. And honestly, the lead work on here, I think, is really solid, too.
And each of the leads fits the vibe of every song. If the song is darker, so is the lead. If the song is groovier, so is the lead. If the song is a barn burner, like 70% of this record, so is the lead. And you don't get just dive bombs and tapping, although there is a lot of that. Like, you do get some more sustained leads. Songs like Comatose, Antidote of Poison, which, again, has the tapping, Missile, and Black Hashish, which has multiple leads. Probably like 6 of them. I don't know if there are lead trade-offs or what.
I'm not sure.
Because the tone doesn't really change, but the style does.
I looked, at least on the archives, and I mean, it just had, both guys listed as guitar. They didn't have one guy that said it was like lead guitar. There is like points where it does sound like a different guitarist playing. Like, there's just different things that each one does. Or it could just be like, the one guitarist kind of just making sure his leads are separate in there. I don't know. Either way, not complaining about the lead work at all.
They have sacrificed nothing.
Either way, pretty much everything about this album, I think, flows well. They don't, have a lot of songs that kind of collide stylistically. Like, Comatose goes into Antidote of Poison, which Antidote of Poison is definitely more groove-laden. Like, there's a good syncopated chug to it, a good, like, double time sort of just kind of anthemic fist pumper, let's destroy this venue kind of vibe. But I did have some issues with this, and they're really, honestly, kind of minor. Your Hunger for War, while I dig that song, it kind of reminds me a lot of kind of the gear that Exodus was in with like Rob Dukes, especially on like Exhibit B, where they would draw out the songs. Granted, all those songs on that album are just chock full of fucking riffs. But I do feel like this song is a little bit drawn out. Like, there's a good, like, lead in to the chorus. Like, they'll do a big instrumental section. And it's a solid riff. I dig it. But I felt like it could have been condensed down. It also has a very strange atmospheric end to it that it doesn't really fit.
Yeah, I don't really know why it's there, and they don't do that again at all during the record, but it's got a really weird fade out, and the effect they put on it is kind of warbled and like underwater and gradually just kind of goes nowhere, and I was like, all right, cool.
And in terms of the flow of the album, it doesn't lead into Incoming Mass Extinction particularly well. Like, the song is just a barn burner and like just loaded with D beats and machine gun chugs, and you get this atmospheric little bit that, again, it doesn't quite link up.
And then I love Black Hashish. That's a great instrumental. They have 2 instrumentals on this record. The other one is Lunar Eclipse. And, I mean, that, again, is a cool instrumental track. It's got a great, like, start-stop riffing in the beginning. It's a little bit slower and a little bit groovier. But, I mean, you get 2 instrumental tracks. You could have easily just slipped in whatever was in Lunar Eclipse into another section in Black Hashish and it would have been fine. Again, they're both kick-ass songs, but 2 instrumentals was kind of odd. And then my last gripe would be they stay in a more aggressive gear longer. They do not slow down for long. And that's cool, but I wanted something to just kind of separate these up a little bit more. Like, because in a lot of songs, they would start slower and you're like, okay, here's a good mid-tempo song, like, that's just kind of cool in a thrash album anyway, just again to kind of break shit up, and you want something that's punchy and whatnot. And every time that they started going slower or more mid-tempo, they would just kick back up into balls to the wall territory, and I just wanted to see something just a little bit slower. Still, overall, I'm gonna go ahead and give this record 4 stars. There's not a bad track on this album, not at all. Again, it's a fucking riff farm. Every single song has awesome riffs. Every single song has awesome leads. I don't have any complaints about the production. Like, it all sounds really good. The transitions are solid, especially when you get through to the back half of the record where it gets a little bit more dynamic. And the song Underneath Millennia, which is proggy and chock full of transitions. Yeah, I don't have any problem with any of these songs. I do wish it would get a little bit slower at times, and I do wish that they would utilize just a couple of like breakdown moments, because there's only like 2 or 3 spots on this record that could be classified as a breakdown. But it's pretty awesome, and really, if you've been around since the 80s, these are old dudes that get, once again, showing people how it's done. And there is no lack of aggression or thrashy goodness on this record. If you're a fan of bands like Slayer, Testament, Morbid Saint, Razor, a little bit of Death, and a little bit of early Meshuggah, and some Coroner, and maybe it's just a pinch of Obituary at times, you're probably really going to dig this. I would recommend checking it out.
I am also at a 4. I dig this. Like, this is just solid thrash. I can pretty much just leave it at that for most of this album. Yeah. But I also like the fact that there are some like legit surprises in here. Underneath Millennia is, probably my favorite track in here. I'm a big sucker for like Coroner style riffs and like, that more techie thrash, like Anacrusis and such. And they did that really well. But I also like the fact that that wasn't like, the bulk of the album. I wanted a straightforward, gnarly thrash album. And that is what I got on most of this album. Black Hashish is also an amazing standout. Again, very different for the band, at least as far as I have listened to them, but executed so damn well. It's a really cool, like, moody piece on there. And again, shows off a lot of dynamics that don't repeat on this album. I mean, baseline, if you've been a longtime fan of Sacrifice, you're probably going to dig the hell out of this. But also, again, if you're into bands like, Destruction, I would even throw in Warbringer in there. But again, Coroner and early Meshuggah was not something that I would expect to like compare this to at all. But this is just riffs galore. It's energetic. This doesn't sound like a band that is tiring out in their old age. They sound like they probably still have more awesome riffs like this stored away for hopefully another album down the line. I'll take an EP too. I'll take whatever. we're glad you're back, Sacrifice.
Welcome home.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you're a fan of any of those bands I mentioned, definitely check this out. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They're only 99 cents. And we do a members-only live stream as our lone perk. It's pretty much whatever we choose to talk about, whatever you guys choose to talk about. Could be just a random hang, could be themed. Who knows? There's really not a tremendous amount of rules when it comes down to Thralls.
Not at all.
Yeah, it's not just because we can't spell that word. It's a big one. It's got 4 letters.
Rule.
5 letters.
ROOLS.
Z, stupid.
Shit.
This is pretty much the way to support the channel now. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. That is linked down below in the video description. And again, if you would like to join Thralls of Metal fans, whatever I called them, I don't even remember.
I don't know.
There's a join button down there, someplace.
Thrallites? Thrallites.
Thralligans.
Ooh, Thralligans. I like it. All right, anyway, you can join or you don't have to join. We're just thankful you're here. Tons of content coming from Thralls of Metal, album reviews, discography rankings, multiple discussion forums, multiple segments. Is it metal, is it not metal, states of metal, Nick's never-ending collection updates. Probably some stuff coming out of me, I promise. I've been working a whole fuck ton lately, but I'm going to get there, I promise y'all. Anyway, all this stuff we do here at Thralls of Metal, we do for you guys. We genuinely appreciate all of our subscribers and our fans and everybody that interacts and has made this into something monumental, because we're just 2 dickheads in a fucking basement sitting here talking to you, but you guys watch it and like it. I don't get it, but you do. That's the important part. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. Tons of content coming your way.
Tons.
So one more big thank you, because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.